Hello guys, and welcome back to another Virgo Girl recommendation. And today's recommendation is Adolescence. Now, let me start off by saying this. This series was very dark and disturbing in a lot of the scenes. But before I even get into anything with it, I want to say for any of you out there who grew up pre social media where everything was online, you had access to everything, and your friends could access you after school and, as well as in school. That is a whole other animal. And I think that is something that really stood out to me in watching this. I mean, think about it. You grew up in a time, if you grew up, I should say, in a time where there was no internet. There was no, I don't want to say there was no internet, but social media is what I should be more specific. If you grew up in an era where social media wasn't as prevalent as it is today, and it really just wasn't a thing as it is today, and we all know, let's just say like the 90s, people would go to school, they would be either popular, not popular, or somewhere in the middle. Some people got picked on. It's more or less what people called it back then. I feel like taunted or what have you. There are some children, of course, that went through things back then as they do now. That's been going on since the beginning of time. Kids are going to pick on kids. That, has always been a thing, unfortunately. However, imagine, like back then, you went through what you went through while you were in school. Perhaps you may have had a phone call with a friend after school to kind of vent about things. You may have went to an after school basketball game or football game every now and then, and you may have talked about, saw the people that you had, quote unquote beef with, or, whatever. But it was like a situation where you could almost escape them once you got into the comfort of your own home. You would have to almost seek them out to have to deal with them once you got home, if you will. So example, when you got home pre-social media, you weren't online seeing someone saying things about you on a post. You weren't seeing emojis or anything like that. You weren't seeing all these things. People weren't texting you things, if you will, about whatever, for the most part. And I'm talking about, I want to go back to, I'm talking about a time if you lived in a time where texting wasn't a thing as well. Now, these kids can't escape anything. Everything's on social media. They record everything. They put everything online. It never stops for them. It's 24/7 access to negative as well as positive. But if it's something negative, it just never ends. I feel like they don't have a break. So I think that needs to be something that's kept at the forefront of your mind when you're thinking about children of today and, like what they go through, their mindsets, et cetera, et cetera. Now, some people may argue that the parents should, limit their children's access to things and all of that. And, that's a whole other conversation. And that's something that, it's probably easier said than done. But I will say this. Kids go through a lot today due to the amount of exposure that they have to everything. The internet is such a wide open place. And these kids, they can be in their rooms. Parents think they're doing homework and if they have a phone, if they have a computer, there's just so much. And I know that there are things that parents can do to limit certain things, but kids are so smart nowadays. You just never know, with these kids. So with all that being said, I want to go into this show, Adolescence. I know that was like a long introduction, but I just wanted to I want you guys to kind of like have an open mind with the show and kind of understand. Because I know, like, if you don't really think about it in today's, you have to look at a specific era, look at today's era only, and don't kind of think back to when you were a kid and this would have happened and that would have happened. You got to kind of look at it from today's lens, and it just really shows how dark it can get for these kids. So anyway, moving on. This, this is a recommendation channel, of course, so I'm not going to spoil the whole series for you, but I want to say this series is about a young man who is being accused of deleting a student in his class. Now, in the beginning, the guy, when they pick him up, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to be honest with you. From the beginning to the end of this, my feelings didn't change much about the ending results. I pretty much felt, okay, it's logical. It seemed plausible. The kid was, I think what they were trying to come across is the dangers of how someone with a fragile mind, someone with a young mind, someone with a developing mind, someone who is being taunted, and someone who feels like, because you guys remember when you were 13, you felt like what was going on in school that year, it was so, so important. You didn't think about, oh, one day I'm going to be 25 and this is not going to matter at all. You don't think that way. So I think it really also showed you how these kids, these things that we look at as so minor, for them it's huge. It kind of touched on how kids nowadays, the way they kind of, I guess, bully or whatever each other, they do it through the internet, and everyone can see the post, and the post, they'll say something about you and it can kind of like damage your reputation, if you will, if the right person says it. Like if a popular person says something about you, then it must be true, and it can kind of damage how other people see you, kind of thing. And then you know how people are, kids, you see it every day on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, people jump on bandwagons. That's another thing I notice about this day and age. People don't really, for the most part, think for themselves. They're not really free thinkers, if you will. Whoever's popular online, have you noticed that people just kind of glom onto them, and no matter what they do, it's okay. But then someone else who is maybe not looked at as a favorite in the industry or whatever, they can do one little thing that's half of what that other person did, and they're just ostracized. They're looked at as the worst person in the world, kind of thing. Well, I'm sure it's no different, with with when you're in school and someone just, you're not looked at as the favorite or the popular or whatever. If someone says something about you, I'm sure there's a huge impact when all the other kids are jumping on and, joining in as well. So this young man was not a popular kid in the school or anything. It seems like he was the type that had a few friends. And from what I gathered, the friends that he had weren't necessarily the most popular either. It was just like, popular kids versus kids that weren't as popular. The same thing that you saw back in the day, the same thing you saw on TV programs from the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. However, now the big difference that I saw is the internet. And they showed how the internet really, really is something that is almost taunting these kids to where they can't escape it. They can't escape the criticism. They can't escape anything. And it's really like heavy on their minds. It's something that's really, I don't know, affecting their psyche, if you will. So moving right along, that's the one angle they have. The other angle is mental illness situations going on with these kids. And that has nothing to do with, because we have other kids that are going through things online and they're just fine. But I think there's another angle to it too, in my opinion. I think there are kids who have underlying mental issues, rage, you know, underlying things in them. And I think the internet only makes things worse, if you will. But at any rate, let's go back to Adolescence. My thoughts, very dark, very deep, very disturbing. It really kind of sent chills down my spine. In one particular scene, when there was one scene where the star, gentleman, I'm sorry, the child that was the star, he was in a session with a therapist. And I won't go into detail, but that was so disturbing to watch. And it was just disturbing, you know, just overall, just very disturbing and very, very dark. That's all I can't stress that enough. The series itself, good series. I felt that they did what they should do. They did what needed to be done. The acting in this was good. You know, as far as the actors go, I thought it was good. However, I do have one little critique. In the parts where they needed to invoke emotion, where they needed it to be really dark and really deep, I think the actors could have dug a little deeper. They did a good job. I'm not taking that from them, but honestly, I've seen better when it comes to those types of scenes. So I think they should have went a little deeper. However, still a good series. I still recommend it. I was left feeling just, you know, I was left feeling kind of sad after watching this, if you will. Definitely no highlights in this series. Nothing funny, nothing light at all. It was very heavy, very much makes you think. And, you know, the sad part about life is we can't control what others do. We can only control how we respond to what they do to us. And that sounds so cliche, but that is so much what I got out of this. If we are not strong enough to handle what's coming to us in life, then we could really go off the rails, you know, if you will. Now that's easier said when you're speaking. I'm speaking from an adult. I'm an adult. However, when you're a child, you know, asking a child to handle certain things is a little bit more difficult. However, even a child should be able to handle things to a certain extent. So we don't expect them to be on the level of, you know, an adult, but we don't expect things to go a certain way either when you're dealing with, you know, children, because there should be also a level of innocence when it comes to children. And then I'm going to leave it at that. I do recommend that you guys watch this. If you're okay with dark, you know, kind of disturbing content or subject matter. It's called Adolescence. It's on Netflix. And the actor, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I didn't know any of the actors in the film. I didn't recognize one person in there. It was set place in, I think maybe Europe somewhere. I don't know, but it definitely wasn't here in America where, you know, where it was, you know, it was set place. I didn't really get where they were actually located. And at this point, that wasn't, it wasn't even really relevant at this point to the storyline, because this could happen anywhere in the world. It's just that that's probably why I didn't recognize the actors, but they all did a good job. I didn't really have anything in particular to say about the actors, if you will. I enjoyed what they, you know, brought to the table, and I gave my little critique, and that was pretty much it. Everything else was good. It just was a disturbing storyline, very disturbing. Anyway, guys, I'm going to close out the video. Don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, peace.